Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Radical Candor podcast. I'm Kim Scott.
I'm Jason Rosoff.
And I'm Amy Sandler. Today we're talking about the fear of feedback, and not even the actual feedback, even the word itself. According to Dr. David Rock, the author of Your Brain at Work, the question, "Can I offer you some feedback?" generates a response in people similar to hearing fast footsteps behind them at night. Danger, danger, red alert, saber-tooth tiger, or your boss is giving you some criticism.
Or anybody, your peer, or your employee, or your 14-year-old.
Yes, no one is immune from the fear. I think that's important.
Yes.
No one is immune from the fear. I do think the fear is intense. I think the saber-tooth tiger becomes even larger when it's someone who has power over you and signs your paycheck.
Yes, yeah, but I think no matter who it is. For example, I was teaching a class at a business school, a local business school recently, and at Stanford Business School recently, and one of the students said that for him, feedback was a matter of existential dread. That was how he described it.
I think that's
Yeah.
my doppelganger over at that local business school.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've read executive coaches and others who prefer the term future-focused feed forward over backward-looking feedback.
Can I just interject?
You can. I mean, you are. Can I give you...
You can tell me to shut up, and I will.
Well,
I will do what
but you always have something interesting to say.
Well, thank
Please
you.
continue.
Yeah.
I really don't like the word feedback. That's why I chose guidance. But feed forward makes me want to throw up in my mouth. I'm just going to tell you how I feel about that. It's not existential dread exactly, but
is
anyway,
that feedback or feed forward?
I think that's feedback on feed forward.
That is
or something.
I think that's acid reflux. So there's been a bunch of articles and TikToks that popped up recently about doing away with the word feedback in favor of this feed forward, or basically, what is radical candor?
Not feed forward, please.
No. Well, we're going to get into this. Different people are calling it different things. I want to say this was actually on a recent Wall Street Journal article that was picked up by the NPR quiz show that some of us are fans of. Wait, don't tell me. There was a question about this very topic. Our friend JD Schramm highlighted this for us.
We love JD. Can I just have a moment of praise for JD? Shortly after Radical Candor came out, JD really helped me a lot understand how to teach this. So just a moment of love for JD. Thank you, JD.
Jason, what was your take on listening to that wait, don't tell me question about feedback?
For those of you who are unfamiliar with it, it's a of the moment news quiz show where they bring some celebrity members and sometimes some audience members into a conversation about current events. And so this is so in the zeitgeist that this quiz show, 2 tiers away from the actual thing happening in the world of work, picked it up. And the way they presented it was, the question was formed something like, feedback is now considered too harsh. And so companies have asked managers to stop giving feedback and to give this instead. And
actually, one of the guests said massages, but we're not allowed because it's a comedy show. And they're like, well, that's not allowed either.
Yeah, so we should stop giving massages also. And the host said not feedback, and the person got it and said feed forward. And the entire audience groaned and started to boo simultaneously.
Oh, they felt the way I do.
Yes. It was an instantaneous reaction. What was funny is just in the background, I noticed that one of the other guests said, "Oh, thank goodness they're stopping with feedback." It was very quiet and sort of an aside. So not a critical part of the episode. But I think the sentiment is shared by a lot of people. You can't just change the word. Just changing the word does not do very much, especially if people's behavior doesn't change around it.
Well, and the problem with the word feedback is that it is itself a euphemism, right? Because even though people pretend like feedback should be both good news and bad news, or praise and criticism. What they really mean by feedback is criticism, but they don't want to say the word criticism. And at least in my experience, which I gave a fair amount of thought to this. I will give myself some credit, but I could be wrong. I'm open to that. So I'm open to the criticism. In fact, when I was teaching at Apple, we didn't want to call it feedback, so we called it good news and bad news. And that was okay, but it felt euphemistic still to me, which is why in the book Radical Candor I called it praise and criticism, because that is what we're talking about.
Yeah, and one of the words that, Kim, also you've been using, you encourage us to use, is guidance. And we also talk about perspectives, sharing our perspectives. In fact, at Microsoft, managers are encouraged to use the word perspectives instead of traditional feedback, according to current and former employees. And this is from the Wall Street Journal article. We'll put this in the show notes. Reviews, meanwhile, have been branded as, quote, connect conversations. The company also recently stopped. Should I go on, or should we connect about connect conversations?
I want to.
The company also the company also recently stopped including anonymous comments from peers in employee reviews, instead showing the names of the colleagues in question.
That's good. I want to give Microsoft some kudos. I want to give them some praise.
A Microsoft representative says the software giant decided to change its feedback approach after seeking feedback about it from staff.
Yep.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's very meta, but not meta.
Yeah, but I mean, not new meta, Facebook like old meta, small m meta.
Yeah. Small M.
Big M Microsoft, small m meta. Yes, Jason.
It started and ended so
well. Are you sharing your perspective?
It started and ended so well. I think
it was like a sandwich.
The perspectives thing is great as long as that's what's happening, right? And I think using the word probably gets people into a better mindset, even than praise and criticism, because praise and criticism are also perspectives. That's one of the reasons why we use that word so often, is no one knows the truth, right? So you're sharing, by definition, you're sharing a perspective. So I think that's good from a mindset perspective. I also think making feedback attributable is good from a process perspective. It makes the feedback much more valuable. But the connect conversations, 2 thumbs down.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm sympathetic, though, because there is a big difference between a development we've talked about this before, but I think it's worth repeating. There's a big difference between a development conversation, which hooks into a person's intrinsic desire to do well and get better, and a performance management conversation, which has to do with, are you getting promoted, and what's the size of your bonus, and what's your rating? It's more of a judgment than like a coaching moment. And obviously it's a continuum. Like, the development conversations need to feed into the performance management, and the performance management conversation better not happen in the absence of development conversations. And the goal of performance management is not judgment for judgment's sake, but to help the people grow and the organization grow in the right way. So, but once you're sort of hooking into decisions about who's getting promoted, what's the size of your bonus, these extrinsic motivators, it's much, much more difficult to communicate. There's a lot more resistance to the bad news and a lot more eagerness for the good news once you're talking about performance management. And so it is, to me, the purpose of performance management is to make these decisions, make the thinking behind these decisions as transparent as possible. And that's why it's important like, when Radical Candor first came out, everybody was getting rid of their performance management systems. I'm like, that's not going to work. So they're important, actually, to have. It's important to do it. But calling it connect, it's more than connection. It's about explaining why I have made this judgment about your promotion or your salary or your bonus.
I think it's just an object lesson in the danger of euphemism. That's really what we're talking about. Is all of this stuff, you're much more likely to encourage the wrong behavior or suggest the wrong behavior by using a euphemism, and to attract the ire and frustration of the people who you're inflicting the euphemism upon, for whatever the
Yes.
real underlying behavior is that's happening in that meeting. If it does not closely match the euphemism you have chosen, you're basically making a joke of the thing. Because everybody's going to
what?
Everybody's going to see the Connect conversation come up on their calendar, and it's going to be a
Roll
joke.
their
You know what I'm
eyes.
saying?
Yeah.
Exactly. You're going to start. It's like time for me to connect about my salary again. You know what I'm saying? Like it's.
Yeah, this is about finding out. This is about money. That's what this is about. Let's call it the money conversation, like, because that's what it is.
It's funny you said roll their eyes, because that was, I think, Kim in the Wait, Don't Tell Me, that, HR folks are changing the word to feed forward. And then one of the jokes was, and now everyone's rolling their eyes at the change to feed forward. And I think it goes to really what Jason is talking about, though, which is about euphemism. And I think part of why people love Radical Candor is the clarity and calling something what it is, or as close to what it is. I do want to talk about the difference between the words and the actual process. So one of the things in the Wall Street Journal...
Can we pause for a moment, though? I had a thought on euphemism, and I'm going to lose it. A euphemism is often an example of manipulative insincerity. And that, I think, is why...
That's why the eye roll.
Yeah. Or whatever the response.
Or worse.
Yeah. And I think also, as people become leaders, they think that people believe their BS. They think they're getting away with manipulative insincerity, but they are not getting away with it. People see through it. And I think people notice the hypocrisy. And that's what I wanted to say about that. But sorry. Please continue.
No. Well, and by the way, like, we love HR leaders, and I think sometimes I want us to get to what's underneath this and why these changes are being thought about. But before we do, just to circle back on the Microsoft piece that was in the Wall Street Journal, they had a quote from a former Microsoft marketing director who said they understand why the company chose to rethink the approach to feedback, which may have, made some more employees more open, but that the decision to put the end to the anonymous peer feedback and reviews actually backfired. The quote this was Jennifer Solomon Baum, who said, "We didn't get the richness of constructive criticism. It became a praise festival." And so, Kim, I'm curious, just from your own experience, without anonymous feedback, does that surprise you that was a consequence of removing anonymous feedback, that it just became, there was a lack of criticism because people were concerned that...
It doesn't surprise me, but it doesn't mean that was a wrong decision. I think it's the right decision to take out the anonymous feedback. And I think it should be expected that people are going to be more reluctant to write their feedback in if they have to put their name to it. And I think it's the job of leaders to create a culture where people will have talked to the person in advance. And so when they put it in there, it's not a surprise. And so, I have some experience with this. When I worked at Google, at first, the way that and now we're talking about performance management system. So we're talking about money, not connection. And the way that it worked was that you would ask people to give you feedback, but you wouldn't see what they wrote. That feedback would go to your boss. Mm-hmm. And then it became the boss's job to spend a tremendous amount of time, like, synthesizing this, making sure it was not personally identifiable, and giving the feedback. And I pushed a lot to make it transparent, so that if you asked people for feedback, you could see what they wrote. And it became my job then to encourage people to talk to the person who they're giving feedback about before they wrote it and put it in the system, so that they were on the same page and not writing things that they later regretted. And I would say that it also became my job, when I got nothing but ruinous empathy or manipulative insincerity, to push people to make sure that people were saying both the positive and the negative. And people complained. They said, it takes so much longer for me to write this down if I know the person is going to see it, than if I think it's just going to you, Kim. And I felt that by allowing that, I was stirring the political pot. I was sort of inviting people to talk smack about each other behind each other's backs. And that was not in the spirit of the kind of culture that I wanted to create. So by making it transparent, by making people put their name to what they were writing to me about each other, on the one hand, I saved myself a lot of time because now I didn't have to spend all this time like aggregating and and anonymizing what was said. But I also cost myself a lot of time because I had to now hold people accountable for writing both about the good news and the bad news, both the praise and the criticism, and for talking to each other before they put it in the system. So it was harder for me to make it. In the end, it would have been easier for me to leave it anonymous. But I felt like if I wanted to walk the talk and build the kind of culture I wanted, it was really important for me to ask people to put their names.
Kim, I don't know if I've heard you say that and spell that out so clearly. I'm curious, did you have some accountability to know that if somebody did put the piece of criticism in, to know that they had in fact had that conversation? Did they share how that conversation went prior to documenting it?
I didn't. So the thing about performance management systems is that they take a tremendous amount of time.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to add more steps. And people were already very grouchy about the amount of time that they spent.
Yeah.
And so what I did was in an all hands meeting, I would say, look, all of you are going to be asked to give feedback about a lot of different people. It's 360. It's really important to and it's going to you're going to assign your name to what you write. And I'm going to hold you accountable for writing not only praise, but also criticism. And if this makes you nervous, I will tell you that there's a simple thing you can do to make it less. Go talk to the person before you put it in the system. Go have this conversation. And there were people who didn't, and there were a couple of Radical Candor train wrecks as a result of having written it down without talking first. But then people learned about the benefit of this thing called a conversation before you put stuff in writing in a system.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that it was cost free. It definitely, it was a pain in the neck. I mean, but that was my job. It was called management, and that was my job.
Look, you used a technique that's very powerful, which is you leaned on natural consequences as opposed to artificial punishment for either doing or not doing the thing that you were asking them to do, which is, you can put it in here without talking to the person, but it's going to be real awkward when they read it and they've never heard this from you.
Yeah.
I think that's the part in this conversation why people get so eye-rolly about the euphemisms, is because if the underlying process is transparent, but the surface thing is euphemistic, the consequences, it's unclear what exactly you expect of me. And so if you're telling me on the one hand that you're going to put my name to this, but on the other hand that I should criticize this person, but you're not creating the circumstances where I have an opportunity to talk with this person ahead of time, et cetera, then you're putting me in a position, like you're making it like a lose-lose situation for me, essentially. And I think especially at the beginning of a transition like that, you also don't want to be the only person who's wandering out on the Radical Candor limb. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to be the first person
be out there.
out there. So it needs to be like you were describing. At an all-hands meeting, you're setting these expectations collectively, and you're saying, this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to hold you accountable. You're going to hold me accountable.
No, you're exactly right, Jason. And there was a lever. I mean, Amy, you asked if I double checked, did you talk in person beforehand? I didn't do that. But what I did do was I said, if you don't put any criticism in, if it's all, this person is so wonderful, I would make people write like a 4-page explanation of why they so it was faster for them to go have the conversation and put the criticism in than it was to justify having no criticism about someone. And so that was another thing that I had to do, because otherwise people would do, but because it is awkward, because people have existential dread about, and they have more dread actually about giving critical feedback than receiving it, although we have it in both directions. But I think giving it is where the real existential dread is. So when you're giving criticism, it needed to be faster to give it than not to give it. And that was also really important.
If we go into this idea of the existential dread, I'm going to have us chat a little bit about what is the difference between feedback and feed forward. Back to this Wall Street Journal article, which was called "Bosses Say Feedback is Too Scary for Some Workers," so they use this word instead. So, quote, "Many companies, executive coaches, and HR professionals are looking to erase the anxiety-inducing word from the corporate lexicon, and some are urging it to be replaced by what they see as a gentler, more constructive word, feed forward. Feedback too often leaves workers feeling defeated, weighed down by past actions instead of considering the next steps ahead. But feed forward encourages improvement and development," its proponents say. And one of the things I think is interesting, certainly that I've been doing in my workshops recently, is I believe that our model that we use embraces both feedback and, Kim, I know you don't like the word feed forward.
I hate it. I hate
know.
feedback, and I hate feed forward more.
So,
but can we go back before we talk about our brilliance, which I do want to get to in our model? I want to go back for a moment, because there's something that was very important in what you read, which is that people want to avoid the discomfort of both feedback and whatever. What did you? Can you read it again? There was something.
I can. Was it the anxiety-inducing word?
Yes, the anxiety,
and then feeling defeated, weighed down by past actions instead of considering the next steps ahead.
Okay, let me parse the problem in order for us to analyze. So, I think that one of the things we talk about a lot is embrace the discomfort. The only way out of it is through. And anytime you're trying to avoid the discomfort, you're avoiding what you have to do, I believe. And so I think that is part of the problem. Now read the second. There was this, what was it about?
So feedback often leaves workers feeling defeated, weighed down by past actions.
Yes, that part. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
That part.
So the problem with that is that what leaves people feeling defeated is poorly delivered criticism. It's not feedback writ large. It's not criticism writ large. It's poorly delivered criticism. Criticism that is about their personality, or criticism that that doesn't show that I'm going to help you improve. Criticism that is delivered 6 months after the thing happened, and you're wondering, like, why have you been holding on to this that whole time? So poorly delivered criticism is terrible.
Can I give you some feedback?
Yeah, please.
I think absolutely poorly delivered criticism, but I will just say that for me, even perfectly delivered criticism can still leave me feeling defeated. Maybe not forever, but certainly in the moment, even if it's from someone I respect, even if it's from someone I built a relationship with, there is some time that I need to process that feedback in a way that I will look at the value of it.
Yes.
So I think there's something about just the actual being criticized, especially for those of us, perfectionists, et cetera. One of the things I'll do in my stories is I'll talk about how many of us don't like to make mistakes. Many of us don't like to make mistakes. I teach this because even though it's uncomfortable for me, I value it so much. But I would say inherently, for me, when I ask, what does the word feedback mean? And people say, it's a gift and guidance and input. And I'll be like, I'm with the existential dread crowd, right? It doesn't mean I don't think it's valuable. And I obviously am here and I'm teaching it, but I think just naming, at least there, my experience, and certainly with the folks that we teach, I think there's some percentage that and I think it's really important to hear, even feedback that's delivered wonderfully and humble and helpful, and you followed the order of operations, it still can land in a way that would be hard for that person.
Yes. That's such an important, 100%, even though I love making mistakes, I 100% agree with you.
Why do you really love, like, is that an intrinsic love of making mistakes?
I don't
Is
know
that
what
how you're
it's about.
wired?
I
Where did
am wired. I don't know where. I think it.
Where
I
did
don't
that
know.
come
I don't-
from?
don't know.
Gosh.
But I 100% agree. Even though I love making mistakes, they still sting. It still hurts. I don't want to pretend otherwise. And in fact, I was thinking about this. I took Mars, my child, to the doctor to get, she had to get a flu shot. And the nurse, and Mars has some anxiety about getting shots, as do I. And the nurse did not say, "This is going to feel great," or, "This is a gift."
Yeah, let's have a connect conversation.
The nurse said, "I'm going to tell you when I'm going to do it. It's going to sting, and then it'll be over." And that was what the nurse did. And Mars said, "Oh, that wasn't so bad." And that's kind of that's kind of what we're going for. That's why I don't like the euphemisms. Like if the doctor, and there are some doctors and nurses who say they're going to do it, and then they do it before they say they're going to do it, and that is not helpful.
Yeah.
Jason, it looks like you have a thought.
That's like the clean escalation thing, which is like, if you leave it up to me, everybody's going to be worse off. You don't want to.
Yeah.
you don't want to put someone in a position of, fundamentally, we're talking about a way to approach a conversation about something that there's likely to be disagreement about, right? Or potentially sort of disappointment or sadness or hurt feelings about. And the question is, how do you do that in a way that has the possibility of creating trust in the relationship? And you do that by being clear and compassionate.
Yeah, this is going to sting a little bit.
Right.
Now I'm going to do it.
Yeah, we often talk about, people will often ask a question in a workshop which rounds out to something like, how do you actually start one of these conversations? Like, what do I say? How do I start?
Yeah.
And
like the on-ramp.
This is the question that they're asking, which is like, do you tell the person, like, it's going to sting a little bit, but then, I'm there to help you? Like, I think this is fundamentally what they're asking. How do I do it in a way that, and I think some people
I think that's right, Jason, because some people, I hear the same thing too. And some people will say, Jason will come to me and say, Amy, I've got some really tough news for you. Like, do you want to say I've got the shot and it's coming? Or do you want actually for me to be like, oh, the shot happened? Like I actually I remember, as you're talking about this in doctors, I had some issue with my ears, and they did this test, and then he came back and then he said, I want to tell you everything's fine. We did this test to rule out, and it was some horribly scary thing.
Yeah.
And so he didn't tell me until after the test. And I actually appreciate it. Like, for me, that wasn't manipulative insincerity. That was like avoiding an anxiety train wreck that didn't really need to happen until it happened. So I think, Jason, what you're saying is similar to, maybe related to the question of, like, some people want to have their performance review given ahead of time so you can process it and take whatever time. And some people just want it like in the moment, and let's just jump right in. Kim, you're nodding. What are your thoughts on that sort of on-ramp, and tell me what's happening and then I'll tell you, versus just like, do you need a preamble, or do you want to just get right?
I want you to just tell me as fast as possible. Yes, but what I don't want, what really kind of makes me mad is when people pretend like it's one thing, but it's another thing.
Yeah.
And as we were talking, I was thinking about a very different trip to the doctor with my younger sister years ago. And our pediatrician, the pediatrician that she and I had when we were kids, would do the thing where he would say, I'm going to give it to you 1, and I'm going to count to 3. And then he would give it on 1, give the shot on 1. And my sister, who was tiny, she was so tiny. She was very short and very thin. It took 6 adults to pin her down to get the shot because she had so lost trust. The doctor had so lost trust with her. And that is kind of how I feel about the euphemisms. I'm going to be like my little sister. Like, it's going to be really hard to hold me down if you don't shoot straight with me and like, so you can tell me, but don't pretend it's one thing when it's another thing.
Yeah, we're hammering on these connect conversations. I think the problem,
money conversation.
Yeah,
what they are.
Maybe they are connect conversation. I don't actually know what's going on. The word makes me nervous.
They said it was the performance management system
Yeah,
was renamed Connect Conversation. Like it's not. It's about money. It's about promotion and bonus and equity. That's what those So it's a money conversation.
Going back to your thing that euphemism is, and euphemisms are often examples of manipulative insincerity. I think that is exactly. It might be with good intent, meaning people might be trying to lower the anxiety level by not using the word. Like the intent might be good, but they've stopped short. They haven't actually gotten to the word that will actually have a chance of lowering anxiety. You know what I'm saying? That there's it's still too abstract. It's still too euphemistic. And I think the idea is create an environment where these conversations aren't dreaded. And from my perspective, if you want to create an environment where the conversations aren't dreaded, people need to get to do better at the conversations themselves and on the sort of like human connection, emotional connection part of it. Like there's both the content of the conversation and the mindset and sort of attitude that you bring into it. Until those things are aligned, until the conversations are both clear and compassionate, it's going to be, doesn't matter what you call them.
Yeah.
If you call them the nicest conversation on earth, and then the person walks in and proceeds to tell me how terrible I am at my job in a discompassionate way with no plan for the future, I'm still going to hate the nicest conversation on earth.
It's not the nicest conversation.
Right,
on
that
Earth.
part's bullshit.
But maybe it's one. Maybe it's one that needs to be had. I think also I want to pause for a second because I have this tendency. It's another one of my bad habits is to assume that I know what I'm talking about when I don't. So I just want to acknowledge I do not work at Microsoft, and I have no idea really what these conversations are. And if you're listening to this and you do work at Microsoft and I'm wrong, I'm wide open to that feedback. So please. Tell me. I have gotten in trouble for that before. So I just want to solicit some feedback from folks who really do work at Microsoft and probably know a lot more about this than I do. But I think if a conversation is about performance management and you're getting a rating and the rating has to do with your bonus and whether you get a raise, which people are getting, there's this inflation thing happening, or get promoted, and that's going to have a big impact on your wallet. Like you're going to have a whole set of concerns about that. And if you were hoping to get promoted and you're not getting promoted, like that's going to be disappointing. And maybe it's going to mean you have to look for another job because you needed that money. You know what I mean? It's a big deal. And to pretend like this is just like feedback, the sort of impromptu feedback conversations about performance that can be fixed, those are hard conversations. But telling someone that they're not getting promoted or they're not getting a bonus or maybe they're going to get fired, like those are much harder conversations to have because they have more practical, tangible impact.
Kim, would now be a good time to get into our model and see how it explores some of these ideas?
Yes. And now I'm ready to talk about how our model is.
So I have been sharing, and I'm curious to get your perspective on it, if we could connect about it for a few moments. Sorry. So context, observation, result, and Center for Creative Leadership has the situation, behavior, impact model. And so we have context, we have observation, result. And from my perspective, that's really feedback in the sense of this is what happened. So the context was we were on the podcast recording. I observed you mentioned knowing that you may have made a mistake about there was a lot of vomit. I was going to give you something kinder about Microsoft, but there was too much vomit. And as a result, we were alienating our listeners who are not going to be joining us for their lunchtime drive.
And I did not take the right next step. I brought it up again.
Then you just doubled down. You doubled down. But we added the idea of next step. And from my perspective, that's really where we're moving from feedback to the feed forward. I know we need a new word, but that developmental, here's something you can do. How can we work on this together? How can we grow and be more productive in the future? What do you think about that? Wording aside.
I love the CORN model, context, observation, result, next step. It helps me in the moment remember that my goal is to help this person to improve and to help this person succeed. And so of course it is about the future, and the future matters more than the past. And so I have no problem with the idea of feed forward. I just don't like the word.
I would just add to what you both have said. I think having a model that focuses both on trying to create a shared understanding of the past so that you can find a path to the future that is likely to result in success, right? Like that. Both elements are necessary. Like the feed forward, the problem I have with it is, how do you know where to go if you have no idea where you have been? Like what has been working or not working in the past? Like it can't all be about the future. Or I mean, maybe it can. Maybe I'm just like, I'm too limited.
Are you clinging to the past, Jason, where we had feedback?
All of a sudden, I'm feeling self-conscious of the fact that I can't like just imagine the future without thinking about the past.
There's bright horizons ahead.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, Jason. I mean, because the essence of good feedback is good storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And stories are mostly about the past. I mean, sometimes you can imagine a utopian future or a dystopian future, and I like those stories too. But you need to be super specific. You need to show, don't tell. And so that, I think, is part of the reason why it's so important to be able to say in the meeting, when you offered both sides of the argument, you earned credibility, do more of that. That's the context, observation, result, next step. Or in the meeting, when you said every third word, it made you sound stupid, go visit the speech coach. So that's CORN for praise, CORN. And I call it CORN. You all call it CORE. Can we just call it different things, or should we?
We have been calling it different things, and we've just been.
It's okay.
I like the world has not collapsed in on itself.
I'm kind of a corny person. So
yeah.
Well, the world is not yet collapsing, but we did get some additional feedback that the word corn and its emoji are in fact references to adult content, especially on TikTok. No, we have not yet checked it out. We have just done one level of research. We have not gone really deep on the research. We're not encouraging you to do the research, but I will say that is another reason why, Kim, we are sticking with core.
One of the things that I can do is share my own observations and say, here's how I have seen things up until now. And I don't know exactly what you need to do, but I'm here to help you figure it out. Like we're going to co-create the path to the future. The danger of feed forward and the one reason why the guidance thing, I think sometimes can come off like a little condescending, actually, because it's like, who?
You mean the word? Are you saying the word guidance?
Same thing with feed forward. I think the idea that I know the right path for you in the future, there's like a condescending air to that. Like the idea that I'm giving you advice. I think people use that word. If I have self-awareness and I'm open to advice, even if that advice is not particularly useful to me, maybe it sparks another thought. And I'm like, oh, that like maybe I can't do that, but maybe there's something similar that I could do. Maybe I can't see a speech coach, but maybe I can watch some YouTube videos about how to become a better speaker. You know what I'm saying? Like I might be able to put that into practice. But I think if you swing in and start giving people advice about the future and say, oh, it wouldn't be really great if you watched a bunch of YouTube videos about how to become a better speaker, like it's pretty easy for that to tilt one way or the other. That might seem helpful or it might seem condescending.
Also, I think you're exactly right about condescending. And I think one of the mistakes that managers in particular often make is they want to start to solve the problem for the other person. They want to start giving advice whereas it would be better to start listening. And so I noticed this thing happened. Did you notice it as well? And I do this all the time with my kids. They come in and they'll be self-critical, and I'll start trying to tell them how to fix the problem. And that is not what they want from me. They want me to listen, and they want to figure it out. And I think that if and part of the reason why, like, if I absolutely knew what the right answer was, then I would tell them. But often, as Jason, as you said, it's like a species of arrogance to say, I know how to solve this problem. And that can also make the problem seem easier to solve than it is to solve. It's often a hard problem to solve.
Yeah. This whole conversation, there's something that's sort of tickling the back of my brain, which is the danger with all of this is running the risk of minimizing the conversation being very emotionally charged in some way or another.
Yeah.
And suggesting somehow that if there's a strong emotional or strong negative reaction to the conversation, that somehow something has gone terribly wrong. The suggestion that it should be easier than it is to talk about performance, even though we have perfectionists and self-critical people. It minimizes that no matter how gently or how future-focused it is, some people are going to walk out of that conversation and be devastated, right? They're going to be like, I thought I was great at public speaking, and now you're telling me I can't communicate a point. You know what I'm saying? Like you're saying, you're saying if you want to be successful in the future, do this, this, and this. And from my perspective, I was already doing it. Like, you know what I'm saying? That there's like and in some sense, it just feels so disingenuous. And then on the opposite side, I think the idea that the solutions orientation to your point, to your story about your kids, Kim, like the solutions orientation somehow absolves us of saying or doing harmful things to people. You know what I'm saying? Like it might be exactly the wrong thing to say to them in that moment. I don't. It just feels so tenuous, and it feels like an attempt to take a complicated thing, which is two people sharing a perspective where there might be disagreement. It's like they're trying to sell you emotional Novocaine. That's what Feedforward feels like.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
And it's
exactly
snake oil.
right. Yeah. Yeah. As is a lot of training that is out there. I mean, most of the training, part of the reason why I wrote the book is that did all this feedback training or feed forward training or whatever. And it left me with a false impression that I could control another person's emotional reaction. And one can't control another person's emotion. I mean, you don't want to try to go out and hurt them. But your goal is to say what needs to be said, and then to be willing to remain present, to have the strength to remain present for how the other person feels, and to be willing to go on this, to have a growth mindset, both yourself and hopefully to instill a growth. But you can't force someone else to have a growth mindset, but to create the conditions where the other person is most likely to have a growth mindset. And a growth mindset, is not helped if you're, let's take math, which is easier than a lot of other things to have a growth mindset about. But if you're being taught by a math wizard who's like, oh, this is not that hard, here's how you do it, like that doesn't help you learn math.
There's something interesting here about the radical candor philosophy, I think, and leaning into the discomfort and the complexity, and acknowledging that this isn't always easy. And yet, Kim, you like to say the only way out is through. And I think maybe we can have a follow-up conversation about anxiety in the workplace, and how do you manage folks that might tend towards more anxiety and still have these kinds of conversations in a way that can be both growth oriented but also honoring those of us who might tend towards the anxious.
We talk a lot about compassion, right? Being compassionate for the other person. I think that is when any model or word suggests to me that it externalizes the responsibility for caring about the other person's feelings, right? If we say feed forward and the person shouldn't be anxious because it's feed forward, it sort of puts the person who is giving the advice in a position of saying, well, this is a process that shouldn't make this other person anxious. So therefore, I am not responsible for engaging productively if they do find it anxiety provoking. That is the thing that makes me really uncomfortable. And the same thing with connection, which is like we're connecting. And if what we're actually doing is talking about performance, and then you have a bad reaction to our connection conversation because
you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of what at one point I moved to a new city and I got a new bank account. And I went to withdraw some money from, and I'd put like, I don't know, I didn't have lots of money, but I'd put $500 in the bank account. So I went to pull out $30 for lunch and dinner. And
this must have been a long time ago.
Yes, it was a while ago. And I got a note back. I got a note back instead of my, $30. I got a note back and it said, because of your relationship with our bank, we're not going to give you your money. And I'm like, fuck you, bank.
I think we have the title for this episode.
I would have understood if they had said like your account's too new, you have to wait,
Yeah.
But like because of your relationship with our bank, we're not going to give you your money. Like
you weren't going steady.
Yeah. No, yeah, that really made me angry. I
we still have some.
I'm not going to say the name of the bank because it wouldn't be quite fair.
Sending
to that
some more
bank.
I'll
emails. Criticize in private. I'll send them a note.
Because of your relationship.
Because of the relationship that you have with them.
You'll send them a note.
Yeah, that's kind of what this is like. Because of your connection,
Yeah.
You're
will not be
upset
receiving
that you're not getting promoted. Like, oh God. That is not. That's
hopefully that's not what's happening. Hopefully this we're wrong in our conjecture. But I have this is not that's a public example. There are some private examples that I'm aware of where it is. The reason why I'm making this assumption is because I have some data that other companies are doing something very similar to that, and it is very disingenuous.
Yeah. I'm thinking about Novocaine. I'm thinking I'm thinking about emotional Novocaine, and I'm thinking why it is so important to remain present for other people's feelings and not to try to, because think about what happens. I had a tooth filled recently. I had a lot of Novocaine, and what did I do? I bit the hell out of my cheek. Like you hurt much worse if you ignore the feelings than if you acknowledge them.
Yeah.
And feelings are really important too. They're important. They give us important feedback.
Yeah. And it's so full circle because in an effort to protect people's feelings, people use euphemistic words which wind up distorting behavior and making people feel like it's unacceptable. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, biting the inside of your cheek and wounding yourself.
Well, on that note, let's get some tips.
Let's do it.
First of all,
let's make it practical and tactical now, folks.
All right, no Novocaine. Jason.
Tip number 1, create a psychologically safe environment where feedback conversations are less likely to trigger existential dread.
Although they might.
Are less likely to trigger existential dread, not unlikely, less likely. But it doesn't matter what you call it. You have to focus on being kind, clear, specific, and sincere in those conversations. To be present, as Kim was saying, for the other person's reaction or response. Calling it the nicest conversation in the world won't necessarily take the sting out of it. And taking the sting out of it may just not be a thing that you can do.
Tip number 2. What works for one person doesn't work for every person. Some people might like to receive bad news in advance, have a chance to process it. Other people might prefer they receive it in the spot in a real-time conversation with you. So you need to get to know the people on your team well enough to know how to give guidance, praise, and criticism to each of them in a way they'll be able to best hear it.
So in other words, Amy, if I were giving you a performance review, I'd send you what I wrote first, and then we would talk about. Whereas if you were giving me a performance review, you would just lay it on me in the meeting.
Lay it on ya.
All right.
Just no Novocaine.
No Novocaine. All right. Tip number 3, use the Korn model to show people what to do less of and what to do more of, and to ensure that you're not giving feedback about someone's personality, that you're employing a growth mindset.
Any feedback on this episode? Or feed forward? Or both?
If there is, we'd love to hear it. You can send us an email to podcast@radicalcandor.com.
You sure can.
It can be criticism. It can be, you can call it whatever you want. We want to hear it.
Yeah. Call him. We'd love to hear your feedback, guidance, perspective about what you think about the words feedback, feed forward, perspective sharing, and more. Go ahead, email us podcast@radicalcandor.com.
Do you want to call it good news? Do you want to call it bad news? Do you want to call it guidance? Do you want to call it praise and criticism? Let us know.
For more tips, visit radicalcandor.com/resources, where you can download our free learning guides, sign up for Radical Candor on Masterclass, get our lit video book, our workplace comedy series, The Feedback Loop, and more. Show notes. There'll be some great show notes for this episode. Head to radicalcandor.com/podcast. Oh, favorite thing.
I have a favorite thing.
Shall we talk about our favorite things?
This week's favorite thing, I wish I wrote it. I read a fantastic book called The Man Who Broke Capitalism. I recommend it. I can't recommend it strongly enough. It is a great book. It's about Jack Welch and how he was a horrible leader.
Let's see, who wrote this? David Gellis.
Yes.
Corner office columnist at the New York Times.
Great book.
I'm excited to read it.
Thanks, Kim.
You're welcome. I have a favorite thing every week.
Bye for now.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
The Radical Candor podcast is based on the book Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Episodes are written and produced by Brandy Neal, with script editing by me, Amy Sandler. The show features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff and is hosted by me, still Amy Sandler. Nick Carissimi is our audio engineer. The Radical Candor podcast theme music was composed by Cliff Goldmacher. Follow us on LinkedIn, Radical Candor the company, and visit us at radicalcandor.com.